Today's daf, we're going to be learning a Shevuot daf Kaftet. Today's daf is sponsored in memory of Joy Rockberger Balsam on her 21st year at site by Lawrence and Michelle Berkowitz, a pioneer of women's Jewish learning who cared for every Jew near and far. May her memory be a blessing for all her nephews and nieces who are serving in the IDF and protecting Am Yisrael during these difficult times. Okay, we're going to get started with the end of where we finished yesterday. I'll just mention that we have a bunch of shiurim up on the site, which are nice connections of Shavuot and Masechet Shavuot. Both it's the series of Alana Stein-Hain about Mushba Vomei Mehar Sinai. The second part went up yesterday, all about acceptance of the Torah and all the relationship to Shavuot. Also, the Jeffy Clymer Shiur, which went up already, maybe even a week ago, about the connection of Shavuot and Shavuot. And there's some stuff on the Hebrew site as well. Meirav Tubal Kahana, two shiurim, one also on the Nishbal Vatelet mitzvah, the whole idea of making an oath to go against the mitzvah. Also, she has a series. I don't know if you're aware of it, but for those who Hebrew's fine, she has a series of shiurim called Nashim Am B'fnei Atzmam. They're not related to the daf. They're related to issues about women and mitzvot. And the one she put up this week, obviously related, was about women learning Torah. So it's an excellent shiur on the opinions and the different opinions about women learning Torah and how we get to what we do today. Okay, with that, we'll get started with Ephah. This very strange interaction between Ephah and his brother. Seems like his brother was probably quizzing him, and it was more like kind of a quiz. Ephah was learning, and his brother comes along and starts asking him these questions. And he asks him these three questions, and every time Ephah answers wrong, and Avimi corrects him. So let's just go to the last case, because that's the one we're going to deal with right now, which is if you say, I won't eat 10, and then you say, I won't eat 9. Right? I take an oath that I won't eat 10, and I also won't eat 9. Now, we said that 9, as soon as you eat 9, it's already a problem. In other words, when you get to 10, you've crossed 9 already. So saying I won't eat 9 is totally unnecessary, which means your Shevuot is not going to happen because it's not a relevant Shevuot. I'm sorry. Did I just say that wrong? I said it wrong. Totally wrong. Apologies. If you say you won't eat 10, you're only going to be liable when you eat 10. So therefore, it's actually not forbidden for you to eat 9. So when you then say, I'm not going to eat 9, you're actually forbidding something additional. You're forbidding it once you get to the 9th one. Therefore, it is going to apply that second oath. Apologies for the confusion. So the second oath will apply. Now, that means that if you eat 10, and this is the key, if I now eat 10 pieces, I've gone against the oath of the 10, and I've gone against the oath of the 9 because I've eaten 9, besides that I've eaten 10. So that's why I'm going to be liable too if I ate 10 pieces. Now, what we're going to say is, and remember what Ephah said. Ephah said you're only chayav 1. So what the Gemara is going to now do, or really Abaye is going to say, so let's go back to 4 lines from the bottom. Amar Abaye, zimnin de mishkacha la laha de Ephah. I could find you a very unique case where you'd only be liable 1, like Ephah said. It doesn't mean I hold like Ephah. What it means is you could have a case where you said, I won't eat 10, and then you say, I swear I won't eat 9. Both your oaths are there. And you ate 10 pieces, but you'll still only be obligated 1. You're going to have to wait patiently to figure out what's that case. So let's hear. So the first thing he says, Kidamar, right? Like Rabbah said, and he's going to quote Rabbah in a different case, and then say, I'm going to apply Rabbah to this case, the logic of Rabbah, or the unique case of Rabbah. I'm a Rabbah. I say I'm not going to eat figs and grapes. So that means I'm not going to eat figs and grapes together. Some of the commentaries say like within 1 day. Okay, that's what Rashi says. I won't eat teinim and anavim on Sunday. And then the person said, well, I take an oath I won't eat figs by themselves. Now that obviously is going to take effect because they're 2 different things. One is no figs with grapes, and one is no figs by themselves. So both oaths apply. Now in the end, we're going to have a case, just like the 9 and the 10, where you eat figs and grapes, but you're only going to be liable 1 sacrifice, okay? Because theoretically, if you eat figs and grapes, you're liable the first, and you're liable the second because you ate figs, right? The first one because you ate figs and grapes, the second because you ate figs. But If you achal te'enim v'yifrish korban, let's say you ate figs by themselves right now. Okay, it's still Sunday. You eat figs and you designate a korban because you realize you forgot that you had made this oath not to eat figs. You forgot. You said it. Then someone reminded you or you remembered. And then you designate an animal for the sacrifice because you have to bring a sacrifice. You went against your oath of expression, your Shevuot Bitoy. Then, achar kach achal anavim lechudayu. Then later in the day, after you designate this animal for a sacrifice, you then eat grapes. Now, what's the problem? Well, as soon as you designate a sacrifice, you make a split between the eating of the figs at first and the eating of the grapes later. And at this point, you're not going to be obligated for eating figs and grapes together because you've designated the sacrifice, which makes it one unit. It's done, complete. Now, when you eat grapes, it's just like eating grapes. Now, there's nothing wrong with eating grapes because you only said I won't eat grapes with figs. So Havi Luanavim Chatzi Shiur, that's not a complete Shiur. You didn't go against your oath in its entirety. You only went against part of the oath, and that doesn't count because the only way you're going to transgress that first oath is by eating grapes and figs, and you didn't. But Chatzi Shiur Lamachayev Korban, you're not Chayev Korban on part of your oath. So let's take the case. So that's what Rabbi said. Abai says I'm going to apply that to our case. Hachanami, likewise by us, Kigon Amal. Shvuah shelo ochal esel v'chazar v'amar shvuah shelo ochal tesha. I say I won't eat 10, and then you say I won't eat 9. So both shvuot apply. V'achal tesha, and then you eat 9. Now you go against your second oath, not the first, because you only ate 9. V'yifrish korban, and then you said, "Oh, I can't believe I said I wasn't going to eat 9. Now I have to bring a korban." You designate an animal for the sacrifice. V'achar kach achal asirit, and then you eat the 10th. So now you know where this is going. So that 10th, here's a case where you ate 10 and you're only liable one sacrifice because you made that split by saying, I'm going to designate a sacrifice. That was already for the 9, and therefore the one you eat is now considered 1 and not the 10th. Okay, and then you won't be liable for the first oath. That's the end of that section. Now we're moving on to 2 Mishnayot, this one, and then we'll get to another one. So first we're going to talk about Shevuot Shav today. And then we're going to have a summarizing Mishna of our chapter and it's really partly a summary, partly a lead into the next chapter, because we're going to finish the chapter today. We're going to say, where does Shevuot Shav and Shevuot Bitoy apply? We're going to see if the laws are pretty much the same, other than one thing, which we've seen a number of times, which is you don't bring a sacrifice for Shevuot Shav, and we're going to see it even in this Mishnah. They're going to repeat it again in the next Mishnah, and they actually already said it in the previous Mishnah. I don't know why they keep saying it. But they're really using it as a foil. Most of the things they're going to say in the Mishnah are kind of obvious and intuitive, but they want to use it as a foil for Shevuot HaEdu, which is going to be a different story. We'll get there when we get to the next Mishnah. So, Ezu hi Shevuot Shav. So, first Mishnah we're going to deal with today is this. What is a Shevuot Shav? We're going to see there's 3 categories of a Shevuot Shav. Shevuot Shav is an oath in vain. And most of this we've already seen already. Nishba l'shanot et hayadua la'adam. You want to change something that people all know about, which is Amar alamud shel even shu shel zahav. You have a pillar of stone and you say, I swear this is gold, a pillar of gold. Ala ishu isha, you swear that a man is a woman. Val isha she ish. Or you swear that a woman is a man. Okay, things that are very obvious to people, and you take an oath about it. We're going to see what makes something very obvious to people. We'll define that, which actually we saw this sugya already before, that if 3 people know about it, right, then it's known. If less than 3 people know about it, it's not considered known. That's like a law we know about also in Lashon Hara, for example, that if it's not considered rechilut for you to tell something that 3 people already know, because it means everybody knows that. So if you say it, it's not considered rechilut. Okay, moving on. That's category number 1. It's something that's known and you say the opposite. You say something that's absurd. I swear that I saw something crazy, like, and we talked about this yesterday with a vow, same thing here. If I didn't see a flying camel. Okay, the language I didn't see, we're going to have to deal with. The Gemara is going to say it should be I did see, right? You're swearing, I saw a flying camel, which is totally absurd. There's no way you saw a flying camel. This is the example we saw yesterday that I mentioned from Nidarim, which is you say, I swear I didn't see, which means, again, I swore I saw a snake that was like the beam of an olive press. We're going to talk about exactly what this is later. Okay, that's category two. So category one is something that's clearly wrong, the opposite of what it is, or different from what it is. Number two, it's something absurd that you clearly didn't see because there's no way such a thing exists. Number three is going to be you say, I'm going to do something against a mitzvah, since we already know you can't take a shvuah against a mitzvah by taking an oath to not do a mitzvah. That's totally in vain because you can't keep that oath. Amar le'edim bo v'yiduni, shvuah shaloni idcha. So the edim say, come testify for us. And you say, I swear I'm not going to testify for you. So you can't say that because the Torah commands you to testify if you know testimony. Nishba levatel et mitzvah, shelo la'asot sukkah, shelo litol ulav, shelo la'niach tefillin. Right? So I'm not going to make a sukkah. I'm not going to, which is actually strange because I didn't really look up what the commentaries say about this. Theoretically, you don't have to make a sukkah, you just have to sit in a sukkah. But anyway, they say shelo la'asot sukkah, but shelo litol lulav, not to take a lulav, not to put on tefillin. Zoe shvuat shav shechayavin al zdona makov al shigata patur. Here's the summary sentence, and we've darshan this a lot before. The zohi, this and not something else. This is a shvuat shav that you're chayav on zdona makot. If you do it intentionally, you get lashes, and different from the shvuat bitoy al shigata patur. If you accidentally did this, like you thought somehow it was gold and you said it was stone, well, you'd be exempt. Okay, there's no such thing as a shvuat shav that you're chayav a korban for, because the Torah is very clearly a shvuah bitoy is what you're chayav a korban for. This is not shvuah bitoy. Shvuah she'ochal kikar zo, shvuah she'lo chlenu. Now they give one other case, and the reason why they put this after is because we're going to have here a combo of a shvuah bitoy and a shvuah chav. So it's kind of like after we learn shvuah bitoy, then we learn shvuah chav. Now we're going to put the two together. Let's say I say shvuah she'ochal kikar zo. I swear I'm going to eat this loaf, and then you say shvuah she'lo ochlena, and then you say I swear I'm not going to eat this loaf. Now, when you take that first oath, that's a shvuah bitoy. Now, by Torah law, you have to keep your word. So, because you can't take an oath against something that says in the Torah, and if you do, it's a shvuah shav. If you say, I swear I won't eat this loaf, after you already committed yourself by the Torah now, you have to eat the loaf. The second part is a shvuah shav. So they say, harishona shvuah bitoy, vashniya shvuah shav. Okay, the first is the shvuah bitoy, the second is the shvuah shav. So now the question is, what are you going to be liable for? Well, if you say shvuah she'ochal, right, you're going to eat. So achala, if you did eat it, so that's good. You kept your oath that you promised you would eat it. But you went against your oath, right? Shvuah she'lo ochlena anyway, it was just a shvuah shav. So you're obviously going to be, right, achla avar al shvuah shav. You're going to be obligated on the shvuah shav. Lo achala, if you didn't eat it, avar al shvuah bitoy. Then you didn't keep your first oath, so you're liable for shvuah bitoy. This line is problematic, and we'll get to it in the Gemara, because in the second case, so I didn't eat it, so I didn't fulfill my shvuah bitoy, but I also, by saying shvuah shelo chlena, that was a shvuah chav. So you should be liable also for shvuah chav. We'll get to that in the Gemara. The Gemara is going to say, oh yeah, it means even shvuah bitoy. You're actually liable for both. Okay, we'll get to there in the Gemara. Amar Ula. So now Ula says what I already mentioned before, which is, what does it mean? It's yadua la'adam. It's known to people. V'hu shenikar l'shlosha b'nei adam. As long as three people know, then it's a problem. Nishba al davar she'efshar lo im lo ra'iti gamal poreach ba'avir. Okay, so now they're going to say, first we have to deal with the language, as we said before. What does it mean if I didn't see? Of course, nobody saw it. Well, why would that be a shvuah chav? Well, shvuah she'ra'iti lo kamar. My im lo ra'iti. It should have said, right? It didn't say, I swear I saw a flying camel. It says, I swear I didn't see a flying camel. So Abaye amar tnei shvuah she'ra'iti. Okay, so Abaye just simply says, change the language. Get rid of the word lo. Should be im ra'iti gamal poreach ba'avir. Rava wants to keep the language of lo, but he has to add a bunch of words to keep that. Rava Amal be'omer ya'asru kol perot sheba'olam alai im lo ra'iti gamal poreach ba'avir. All the fruits of the world will be forbidden to me if I didn't see a gamal poreach ba'avir, if I didn't see a flying camel. Meaning, I definitely saw a flying camel, and I'm taking this oath. Okay, it's missing the word oath in the sentence, if you notice, and it sounds more like a neder. A neder is, this will be forbidden to me. So the commentaries say that what we really mean is Yasru Perot Alai Bishvu'ah, like I'm taking an oath that all the fruits of the world will be forbidden to me if I didn't see a flying camel, which basically means I saw a flying camel and therefore nothing's going to be forbidden to me. That's basically what you're saying. And that's a Shevuot Shav because there's no way that happened. Okay, so that's a bit of a more complicated way of doing it, but he keeps the language of lo, just has to add some other words. Okay, now we get to the next sugya, which will be a little while, which is Amrle Ravina Ravashi. Vidilma Hai Gabri, he asks a great question. Maybe this person, when he said, I saw a flying camel, really meant he's Hai Gabri Tzipora Rabachaze, saw this giant bird in the sky. Ve'asik Leshma Gamla, and he called it camel. Okay? Called this giant bird a camel. And when they took the oath, when the person says, I swear I saw a flying camel, the person was actually talking about something that was flying. It was a bird that the person decided to call a camel. So, now, if you want to say, when we talk about, and this is all we talk about a lot, when we talk about things people express in words, do we go by the general definition or do we go by what this person claims specifically they meant? So they say here, if you want to suggest, if you want to say batar pume azlinan, we go by what came out of the person's mouth, which is the word camel, which means a camel, not on the ground, not a flying camel, not a bird that someone called camel. Below azlina batar date, and we don't go by the person's what they claim, right? Like imagine this case. So I say, I swear I saw a flying camel. And then you take me to court and you want to punish me. And I say, what are you talking about? I didn't mean that. I meant a bird that I call camel. Would I be able to be exempt? Right? So obviously not. The question is why not? So now they're going to suggest. Now, chitem is usually rejected, but in this case, we're going to reject it, but then reject the rejection. And in the end, this is going to be our answer. Our answer is, I'm telling you this so you don't get confused by the back and forth here. In the end, it's going to be that when it comes to oaths, we go by what you said and what the general meaning of that word is, and not, you can't come up and say, oh, I really meant something else. Okay, it's not work, doesn't work in an oath. So now we're going to try to say why it seems like you could claim, oh yeah, it was just a bird that I called camel. Why do we think this? Well, Hatanya, it says we're going to bring two different sources. And both sources, there's some sort of oath where we say al dat ha, like it's by our dat that you're doing this. Okay, we'll see the two oaths and you'll understand in a minute. The context here of this source is that it's we're talking now about if you're obligated an oath by Torah law, like a moda b'miktzat, you admit to half and then you have to swear about the other half. It's like you say, I swear I already paid back half and pay back the whole thing. Right, or sorry, right, it would be who takes the oath, right? You claim I owe you 100 and I say, right, I don't owe you 100, I only owe you 50. So you take the oath and then you don't have to pay that first 50. So Hatanya, or it's just like there's one witness. One witness is b'chayv you a shvuah to keep what's in your hands. So kisha must be inoto. When the court tells the person you have to take an oath, omrim lo, they say to him, heve yodeh, shelo datcha anu mashbi'im otcha. Listen, it's not according to what you think. Ela al da'atenu v'al da'at beitin. When we're making you take this oath, it's based on what we say and not what you think. Okay? This is based on the meaning this oath has for us as the court. Like they're going to make you say, I already paid back 50. And you're going to have to take an oath about that 50. So my time up. Now, what's the reason? Why do they have to say this? Now, if I couldn't claim, okay, let's say it's me who has to take this oath. I already paid back 50 to get exempt from that 50. So now, if I take that oath, they're saying you can't do it based on the meaning of what I think, which sounds like if they hadn't said al da'atenu v'al da'at beitin, I could have. That's the idea here. So it sounds like I actually do take an oath on my own dad, unless someone tells me otherwise. Okay? That's what we're going to try to prove here. My time, and then we're back to our question. Well, then why can't the person just say, oh, it was a bird, right? It wasn't a camel. My time. So what's the reason why they have to say al da'atenu v'al da'at beitin? Lav mishum da'amrinan, dilma iskundre yaivle va'asik lezuze. When I say I gave you back 50 zuzim, okay? Maybe I gave you 50 tokens. Maybe I had a game in my house and I called it zuzim. And then I come and I say, I swear I gave you 50 zuzim. Now, the zuzim I was talking about was a game. It wasn't worth 50 real zuzim. Okay. That's obviously what they're concerned about. That's what they assume, which means that when I say zuzim in court, I could claim later that I didn't really mean zuzim. Now, in this case, I can't because the court says you're doing it by what we call zuzim and not what you call zuzim. And that must be why the court says this. And then we're back to square one with our question. To which the Gemara answers, lo, hata mishum kanya derived. That's not what we're worried about. We're worried about a different kind of chicanery. Okay, chicanery, is that how you pronounce it? A different type of chicanery, which is if in this case of Rava, okay, meaning that wasn't Rava who did this, but it was Rava's court, where somebody owed someone money. And then they came and they swore they gave it back. But what they did was, before they gave it back, kanya is a reed. They took a reed that was hollowed out. They put all the money they owed in the hollow reed. They gave it and they said to the person, can you just hold this for me? They gave it to the person they owed the money to. They took the oath. I swear I gave the guy all the money back. And they really had given all the money back. And then they took the reed back. So now what happens? Now they took the money back. So they took a true oath. So when the court says al da'ateinu v'al da'at beitin, they mean that you really gave it back the way we say you gave it back, and not in this tricky kind of way and trying to fool all of us. No. And that has nothing to do with the words. The meaning of the words was the same. He really did give the money back. It's just he gave it back in this kind of way that really was not wasn't fair. So that doesn't prove anything in the end. This al da'at beitin and all that has nothing to do with our topic. And basically, in the end, you could say, based so far, we don't have any reason not to say that really it has to be the when you it goes by the standard meaning of the word. Okay, and that's why anyone who says I saw a gamal porech ba'avir, a camel flying, ends up with a Shevuot shav. But now the Gemara says, what about this source? Tashma. V'chem matzinu, also very appropriate for Shavuot. Kishishbia Moshe Yisrael. This isn't actually a Matan Torah. This is, I think the commentaries claim this is at our Vot Moav, okay, in beginning of Sefer Dvarim, before they get into the land, when he swore the Jewish people to keep the covenant. Amar lahem, he said to them, Du'u shelo da'atchem ani mashbi'atchem, el al da'at hamakom v'al da'ati. Okay, same thing. We're not giving you thanks, Debbie. Right. Of course, we say this on Yom Kippur. Al da'at hamakom, al da'at kahal, all that. So he says, it's not on my dot. It's not on your dot. It's me and God. Okay. So now, amai lemalu kaima mada amar Eloha. Why didn't he say it? Now we're going to go through a list of things that Moshe could have had them take an oath. Why didn't he say that? Why did he have to say these words on my dad and on God? Because we're going to basically say he could have said something else, but then they could have claimed, right? The reason he didn't do it was because they could have claimed, oh, what we really meant was something else. Okay, and then we're going to go through a long slew of options here. So he could have said instead, without having to say that, he could have said, Kimu Mada Amar Eloha. Agree to, right, admit to keeping what God said. Now, why didn't he say that? Because La Mishum Damaske Da'atayu Avodah Zarah. Isn't it because they could have said, oh, later on when they start worshiping idols, they said, and say, well, you took an oath. You would do what God said. And they said, what do you mean? Eloha, we meant Elohe, right? Avodah Zarah. So they say, okay, no, that's not a good explanation because the reason he didn't do that was much more clear because Mishum Avodah Zarah Nami Ikre Eloha, Tichtiv Elohe Kesef Elohe Zahav. Eloha wouldn't work no matter what because Eloha could mean God, could mean idols. It's not like there's a standard use of it. It could mean God, it could mean idols, and that's not like they said, oh, we had a unique way of reading it. So that's not a good explanation. V'leimalahu kimu Torah. He could have said, keep the Torah. And why didn't he say that? Because he was worried that maybe they would explain something else, right? So they say, well, chada Torah, right? That would have meant they could have said, oh, well, we only keep one Torah, okay? And then later they could say, right, when we said Torah, we really meant one Torah, meaning Torah, there's Torah Shebechtav and there's Torah Shebal Peh. This is right. The first is to will be concerned for idol worshippers. The second is to be concerned with the Karaim and all those other sects that Stukim, they kept only the written Torah. The Lema Kimu Shtei Torot. Well, he could have had them take an oath to Torot. So now they write, and then maybe he was worried they would explain, I don't know what, but then they say no, because they really could have said to, it's again, each time we're going to say that really means something else, okay? To Torot could be very easily referring to Torat, Chatat, V'Torat Hashem. Could have meant we'll bring sin offerings and guilt offerings if we need to. Kimu kol Torah kula. Okay, we'll keep the whole Torah. Well, then that's pretty clear what it means. So then they say no, because avodah zarah, they could claim, oh no, we said we're going to keep the whole Torah. What we meant was we're going to keep, meaning not worship idols. Right? Anyone who goes against idol worship, right, is as if he's not keeping the whole Torah, and therefore you would have thought it's like all the mitzvot, and then what you really meant was I'm just not keeping avodah zarah, and as I'm just not going to worship idols. V'leimalu kimo mitzvah. So maybe they should say we're going to do a mitzvah, and then it would be pretty clear. They say, what do you mean? Chad mitzvah. They could claim we only meant one mitzvah. Kimu mitzvot. How about mitzvot? That would have worked. No, tarte. That means two mitzvot because plural of mitzvah is two. Kol mitzvot, kol mitzvot kulan. That would have been pretty clear. We'll keep all the mitzvot. That also wouldn't have been clear because mitzvah tzitzit. Amar mar shkula mitzvah tzitzit kineged kol mitzvot kulan. Again, we have a mitzvah that's known to be as if it's all the mitzvot. So maybe all they meant was mitzvah tzitzit. Wait a minute. Moshe could have said, and here we get to he really could have said, keep 613 mitzvot. It's a bit of a problem there. No one themselves could keep 613. Some are for Kohanim and some are not for Kohanim. So there's no person who could actually keep all 613. But theoretically, as a group, they could have taken this oath. Well, all together, we'll keep all 613 mitzvot. And that could have been said. So now we're like, well, then why did he say, right, the al dat hamakom v'al dati? And then they're going to basically try to say maybe it's because he was worried they would explain we had some weird way of, understanding this. So then as a counter, they say back, wait a minute, even if you say Moshe was trying to be concerned for some chicanery or something, well, he could have then just said, I'm making you take an oath on my dot. Why do you have to say on my dot and on God's, with God's, what God intended? Turning out on the bed. The whole reason why this was done had nothing to do with anything having to do with our topic. The whole reason was they didn't. Now, we already learned that you can undo a shvuah, right? We were just talking about that. You can undo a shvuah, right? In yesterday's stuff, I think it was. You can just go to a chacham and say, can you undo my vow, my oath? So God wanted to make sure, Moshe wanted to make sure that the people didn't come later and say, oh, well, we're just undoing our promise. So because of that, when you say al dat God, then there's no way that they can undo it. And that's why Moshe said on my dot and on God's dot, and there's no way to undo this vow, this oath. And therefore, this really has nothing to do with our topic. So in the end, we could say that we're not worried about someone claiming, oh, I was talking about a bird that I called a camel, because when it comes to these kind of oaths, we go by the general understanding. And all these cases where it said al dat, the Beit Din, al dat, God, were for other reasons entirely. And now we're going to get back to the Nachash. Im lo re'iti Nachash kekorat Beit Habad. I made mention of this yesterday. Velo, because it came up in that sugya Nedarim. Velo, v'ha'alu da'ave b'shnei shabur malka. Okay, right now they assume that we're talking about a gigantic snake because the beam of the olive press was big. If you've ever gone to these ancient olive presses in Israel, they're very big, or maybe somewhere else in the world, but they're very large. So they say, but wait a minute. In the days of Shabur Malka, who was the Persian king, there was a snake that ate 13 stables full of hay. Okay, it was huge. Amar Shmuel b'taruf. So Shmuel says, no, what he meant was not in size like the Korat Beit Habad, but in not exactly texture, but the outer skin of the snake was taruf like the Korat Beit Habad, and that isn't. Now, what is taruf? Good question. So Rashi explains it has bikaim, like what do you call it? Like ridges in it. Okay, and snakes don't have ridges. So other commentaries, like the Aruch, say it's flat. Okay, and the snakes aren't flat. So it's actually they're kind of a little opposite, having ridges or being flat. So it's a really good question which one it is. Anyway, whatever one it is, that's what they meant that you said that. So which the Gemara says, kulunami mitraf trifim, but all snakes have that. So what do you mean? Well, bishagabotaruf. What they meant is the back. Okay, the back side of the snake is never taruf, whether it's flat or whether it's with ridges, and therefore this person said something that no snakes ever have. We had a bit of a problem with this last line in the Mishnah. Right? And what if you did eat? Right? What if you didn't eat it? So if you didn't eat it, you're over on Shevuot Bitoy because you promised you would eat it and you took an oath and then you didn't. But wait, you should also be chayiv Shevuot Shav because you also made a Shevuot Shav at the end. Because as soon as you said Shvuot Shochal Ki Karseh, you can't say Shvuot Shalochlena because that's not keeping to what you promised. And that would be a Shevuot Shav. In other words, when you didn't eat later, right, that's when you transgressed the first oath. But the second oath was transgressed at the moment that you said it. To which Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Tanei, Afal Shvuat Bitoy. So Rabbi Yirmiyah says you should read it as even al Shvuat Bitoy, okay? And therefore it's both. The Yerushalmi actually says, so what should you do in such a situation that you take this oath? As let's say you did take this oath, okay? Not realizing that you shouldn't have said this, right? So you did Shvuah Shochal Ki Karso, Shvuah Shalochlen. Now the truth is you would have to realize because in Shvuah Shav you wouldn't be liable unless you knew you were doing it because there is no Shogeg Korban. So let's say you did this intentionally. Now what's your best bet? Okay? Should you eat or not eat? So they say obviously you should eat because if you eat, you'll fulfill the first oath and you'll only have to bring, be liable lashes for one, right? Best to minimize the damage. Okay, new Mishnah. This Mishnah is not so necessary. I mentioned this earlier in class, but now that we're getting to it, I'll be more clear about it. The next Mishnah on the next daf that we'll learn tomorrow is about Shevuot HaEdut. Shevuot HaEdut is when you say, I don't know testimony for someone else, and you swear I don't know testimony, and you lied. You really do know. Now that we're going to learn is only for men, not women, because women don't testify. It's only for non-relatives, okay, or people who are kasher laha'id, because it all has to do with edut. If I can't testify anyway, then by me lying and saying, I don't know any testimony for you, it's irrelevant. I can't testify for you anyway. So, right, putting aside this whole issue of women and edut is a whole question, but it has to be people who theoretically could testify. And then this whole question, is it in the court, outside the court? We'll get to all that. So now, because of that Mishnah, this Mishnah is going to now talk about a Shevuot Shav and a Shevuot Bitoy and say basically that Shevuot Bitoy no heget be'anashim uvinashim. This is relevant for men and women because it has nothing to do with testimony, right? Without knowing the next Mishnah, you wonder why they're telling you this is quite obvious, or maybe you want men and women because sometimes women are excluded from things, but there's no reason to think women are included in all the lotas says in the Torah, all the don't do this in the Torah. So lo yachel dvaro is don't not keep your word. So Shevuot Bitoy is no heget ba'anashim u'v'nashim, men and women, but this is a little bit more really irrelevant. Krovim and rechokim, relatives and non-relatives. Relatives and non-relatives of who? These are usually Shevuot that you say by yourself. So that's why it's a very strange phrase. But again, because it's going to be compared to the next Mishnah, that's why they said this. Biksherim u'bipsulim, again, this would have no relevance, but if you're a kosher witness or not a kosher witness, it doesn't matter. If you said, I swear I'm going to do something, it's valid. Maybe you would have some thought that an oath is like something done in a court, and therefore maybe you would have thought, but it's more for the foil. Bifnei beitim v'shelo bifnei beitim. It doesn't matter where you said this statement. I take an oath, whether you took the oath in the court or whether you took an oath outside the court, it's still valid. Mi piatzmo, and if you say it yourself. This sounds like, and we're going to get to this later, this sounds like not if somebody else swore and you just said yes, okay? Because it says mipiat smoke, but you'll see that the end of the Mishnah seems to say otherwise. We've seen this many times, okay? This is because this is Shevuot Bitoy, so it's intentional. You'll get lashes. If you go against it unintentionally, you bring the sliding scale offering. Shevuot Shav, same thing. No hegeb anashim u'v'nashim b'rechokim u'b'krovim b'ksherim u'b'psulim b'fnei b'din shelo b'fnei din u'mipiat smoke. Exact same thing. One difference here, which we already know. I want you to know this is the third Mishnah in a row where we mention that line. Good question why it keeps repeating, but there's no korban. That's the basic chiddush here. Okay, both Shevuot Shav and Shevuot B'Tur. There's also some weird things about the structure of this Mishnah because everything so far was the same other than the punishment. So it should have said Echadzo v'Echadzo and listed all those things in the beginning and then just said the one difference is the Korban. I don't have a good answer for that, but it is a strange structure of a Mishnah. So both of these things, if somebody else swears, makes you swear, okay, they say, let's say I say, I'm going to eat today. I just say, I'm going to eat today. I don't say shvuah. And they say, do you promise? And I say, yes. Then it's a shvuah. Okay. Then you'll be liable. Lo achalti hayom velo inachti tefillin hayom mashbiachani v'amar amen chayav. Here's the example. I say, I didn't eat today. I didn't put on tefillin today. And then the person says, are you willing to swear to that? And I say, amen, to what they said, chayav. Okay. So I said before, yes. The Mishnah actually says you said amen. Okay, we're going to talk about the difference soon. Okay. Amar Shmuel. If you say amen after an oath, it's like you express the shvuah in words. Okay, it's as if you said it yourself. Where does he get that from? Dichtiv amra isha amen amen. This is in the Sota where the Kohen, it says Shbiah Kohen, and he says the words, and she says amen amen. It's as if she swears. Okay, now that's considered an oath, the oath of Sota, and therefore we'll learn. Now, what Shmuel says is kind of clear in the Mishnah, and the Gemara is going to try to, first they're going to say, we can prove Shmuel. First, they're going to prove it from a contradiction between the next Mishnah and a Braita, and the only way to resolve the contradiction is to say about this Amen thing, which we're going to talk about soon, and then they're going to prove from our Mishnah, and then say, well, if it's so clear from the Mishnah, then why is Shmuel saying it? And that's how we'll end our sugya today. So now the Gemara says, actually Rav Papa says, Mishmei de Rava, in the name of Rava, matnitinu Braita nami daika. Okay, we can derive this from this contradiction between the Mishnah and the Braita, okay, which Shmuel said. Dikatani, it says in the next Mishnah, Shvuat ha'idut no heged, and here we're going to already learn the next Mishnah, be'anashim v'lo b'nashim, men, not women, richokim v'lo b'krovim, non-relatives but not relatives, bikshirim v'lo b'psulim, kosher witnesses, not non-kosher witnesses, ve'ena no heged, ela b'ruyin laha'id. It only applies to someone who could theoretically testify. Ubifnei beitin v'shelo bifnei beitin. Actually, it could be in court or outside of court. Mipiatzmo, okay, which would be on your own. If you testify and say, I swear I don't know edut, whether you're in court, whether you're out of court, and you do, that you're going to be liable. Umipiachirim, this is the key line. But if other people get you to testify, to swear, meaning somebody says, hey, come testify for me, and you say, I don't know anything, and then they say, are you willing to swear? And you say, yes. Well, then, that will only be an effective oath if it's done in court. If you just say them on the street, no, I'm not willing, after they say, will you take an oath? And I say, no, I don't know testimony, right? Or something like that. Okay, again, that's going to be the question. What exactly did I say? Okay, but that's not going to be considered an oath if it was done outside the court. If it's done in the court, it will be. And then that's divrei Rabbi Meir. That's what Rabbi Meir says. Now, Tanya b'Braita and another Braita, we're going to see Rabbi Meir. Okay, so we had this Mishnah, and now we're going to compare it to a Braita, Shevuot, which is also going to be Rabbi Meir. Shevuot ha'edu kitzad. What Shevuot ha'edu? Amar le'edim bo v'yiduni. So, person says to the witnesses, come and testify for me. Shevuah she'ein anu yodim l'cha'edut. Okay, either they say, we swear we don't know any testimony, or she'amru ein anu yodim l'cha'edut. They didn't swear. They just said, we don't have any testimony for you. Mashbia ani alechem, they said, the Baal Din, the defendant or plaintiff said, are you willing to swear? I'm making you swear. Va'amru amen. And then they said the words amen. Bein b'pnei beitim, bein shelo b'pnei beitim, bein mipi atzmo, bein mipi acherim, kevan shekafru bahem chayavim divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, doesn't matter if they said this in the court, doesn't matter if they said it out of the court, because they said amen, the oath is in effect. So now, kashina hadade, these contradict. In the first one, if someone else makes you take the oath, we said only in court is it effective. In this one, it says even outside court. So what must be the difference? And if you noticed, ha da'ana amen, ha de lo ana amen. There's a difference between someone saying, are you willing to take an oath? And you say, yes, or you say, I'm not willing to testify. That's different than saying the word amen. If you say amen, it's as if you took the oath. And therefore, since taking an oath outside the court would be a valid oath, someone else making you take the oath and you answering amen will be a valid oath. And that proves Shmuel that saying amen is as if you took the shvuah yourself. But if you just said, no, I don't know testimony after they said, well, you swear, that's not going to work. Okay? That only inside the court. If you do it inside the court, yes. If you do it outside the court, no. So there you see the contradiction between the Mishnah and the Braita, and the only way to resolve the contradiction is to differentiate between saying Amen and not saying Amen. And that proves Shmuel. Now, I'm a Ravina, Mishmei de Rabba. Ravina is going to say in the name of Rabba, Manitin dahacha nami daika. We can also infer this from our Mishnah. De katani shvuat b'toinu hegeb anashim uvenashim, b'rchokim, b'krovim, b'kshavim, b'psulim, b'fnei beitin v'shalo b'fnei beitin. Here's the key. It's missing words here. It should say umi piatzmo, okay, and, because the Mishnah said and if you say it on your own. And then it should say mi piatzmo in, okay, the words got, the double words, it should have said it twice. It got deleted, which you can imagine why that would happen. Excuse me for a second. So now we have the following. It sounds like, and this I read when we read the Mishnah, mipi atzmo in, mipi acherim lo. Only if you testify on your own. It sounds like if other people make you testify, it won't be valid. Vikatani seifa, right? It won't be an oath. But the seifa says, zev zem mushba mipi acherim chayav, right? Both these kind of oaths, if someone else makes you swear, you're chayav. And then what did it say? Remember, it said, Lo achalti hayom, lo inachti tefillin hayom mishbiachani v'amar amen chayav, right? So now, how are we going to resolve this contradiction? Kashina adad. The first sounds like if other people make you take the oath, it's not an oath. So el alav shmamina hada ana amen, hada lo ana amen. That must be the distinction. If you said amen mipi acherim, it will be an oath. But if you didn't say amen, it won't be, and that proves Shmuel. To which the Gemara says, right? So hada ana amen, hada lo. So Ella Shmuel my kamashmalan. If it's so clear from the Mishnah, then what was Shmuel telling us? Well, dukia de matnitin kamashmalan. He wanted you to know that this is what the Mishnah meant, okay? Because you might have thought that the Mishnah could be read like this: Mi piatzmo is in the beginning, and there's no derivation there. And then mi piacherim works also, whether you say amen, whether you say something else. They were just giving you an example, but maybe mi piacherim works in any case. And what Shmuel wanted to tell you is no, this is the way to read the Mishnah. Mi piatzmo is only mi piatzmo. If someone else said you had you do it and you didn't say amen, it wouldn't work at all. It wouldn't be an oath. And from the Sefer, you learn, though, if you say amen, it's as if you said the Shevuot, and that is Shmuel. And with that, Hadran alav Shevuot Shtayim. We finished our parak. We're going to move on to a new topic. Right? We finished all the Shevuot Bitoy, Shevuot Shav. Now we're moving on to Shevuot Eidu. Right? It's very organized Masechet again, other than the first two chapters, which were totally out of left field of Yediot Hatuma. Now we're just basically going through all the different types of oaths. Okay, so what do we have today? We went through the one case where you could see Ephah actually right, even though it's not really the eighth is right. It's just the halacha would be like he said, even though it's not right. He's still wrong about what he said, but there would be a case where you ate 10, you'd only be liable 9 with the korban in the middle. Then we said, what are the 3 categories of Shevuot Shav? You had the against, right, something that's clearly everybody knows, against, right, saying something is absurd, that's saying something that is totally absurd, and against a mitzvah, because you can't do a Shevuot to go against a mitzvah. Then we got to some definitions of these things. What's a, right? We had to change the words, lo re'iti, or something like that. Then we had this whole question about why couldn't you say a gamal was a bird? And then we had to bring these other sugyot to try to say, but in the end, we basically say it's because we go by the standard meaning when it comes to an oath like this. What is the nachash kekorapet habad? What the last line of the Mishnah, there was something that was a little off because it said you're only chayav 1 and you really should be chayav 2. And they said, oh yeah, even Shevuot Bitoy you're chayav. And then we went to the comparison of the Shevuot Bitoy and the Shevuot Shav. What's all the same about them? There's only one difference between them, but there's a lot of differences between them in the next Mishnah, which as we kind of already saw. And then we had the Salach of Shmuel, and then we tried to prove it both from the next Mishnah, contradictory down in the Braita, and from our Mishnah. We were able to prove Shmuel's point that if you say amen, it's as if you took the shvuah yourself. As opposed to if you just agree when someone says take a shvuah, that's in a different category. And with that, we're going to finish. And then there's different details, right? Depending on which one, whether you're outside the court, inside the court, right? Depends, shvuah edu, shvuah bitoy, what we say about that halacha. Anyway, with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom, and we should hear good news, B'Karov.